She traded herself for food and shelter, but the rancher gave her a wedding ring and built her a room. The sun hung low, burning like a red coin pressed against the horizon. Heat rose off the earth in shimmering waves, carrying the scent of dust and sweat, of a land too tired to give mercy. A lone figure moved across the plains, slow, staggering, her shadow thin and broken against the dying light. Her dress was torn, hem stiff with dirt, fabric clinging to her frame like rags on a scarecrow. Every step seemed borrowed, stolen from the strength that had long abandoned her. Her lips cracked with each shallow breath. Behind her, circling in patient silence, coyotes trailed, gray shapes in the distance, waiting for her to collapse. Their eyes glowed with hunger, their paws soft against the sand. She did not turn. She could not. At last, the town appeared like a mirage. Weather-beaten buildings clustered around a crooked main street, saloon doors swinging in the hot wind, a church steeple crooked as if ashamed. She pulled herself toward it, trembling, her eyes raw with pleading. The saloon doors slammed shut as she passed. Men leaned on railings, their laughter sharp as broken glass. "Best keep moving, darlin'," one called, spitting tobacco into the dust. Another snickered, his voice soaked in cruelty. "Ain't no charity here." Their eyes undressed her, not with desire but with contempt. She lowered her gaze, clutching the fabric of her dress, shame burning hotter than the sun. No hand offered water, no soul offered kindness, only jeers, only silence. She walked until the town was behind her, and the open land stretched wide again, heavy with loneliness. Each breath rasped like dry leaves skittering across stone. Her knees buckled once, twice, and finally she fell, hands scraping against gravel. She did not cry. Tears had abandoned her long ago. When she lifted her head again, she saw it. A ranch. It sat against the plains like a fortress of timber and stone, fences stretching out to hold the land. Horses grazed in the distance, their tails flicking against the flies, their heads rising warily at her approach. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the smell of wood fire. Her legs shook as she forced herself up, staggering across the dirt until the wooden porch loomed before her. There he stood, a man, broad, weathered, a rifle resting against the post by his hand. His face carried the map of a life carved in hardship, scars crossing his jaw, eyes like storm clouds, dark and unreadable. He said nothing as he watched her, the wind lifting the brim of his hat. Her throat burned when she tried to speak. Words broke from her lips like stones dragged from a dry well. I can work." Her voice was hoarse, nearly gone. She swallowed, tasted blood, then forced the rest out. "Food, shelter. I'll trade myself. Whatever you ask." The silence that followed stretched long. A hawk wheeled overhead, its cry sharp as a knife. Dust curled around her boots. Her body sagged, pride trembling on its last thread, yet still she stood, offering the only thing left that was hers. The man's gaze did not soften, nor did it harden. It stayed steady, searching her with a weight that made her skin crawl. Minutes bled into eternity. Her chest heaved, her breath shallow, her heart pounding like a drum of war. At last, he moved. One step forward. His boots thudded against the porch planks. His voice came low, rough as gravel ground beneath a wagon wheel. "Eat first." Her head lifted, stunned, as he reached for the door. He did not look back. His next words carried like iron across the fading light. "Then we talk." The door creaked open. The smell of wood and stew drifted out, almost too much to bear. Behind her the coyotes howled, their cries swallowed by the coming dark. She stood trembling, the world tilting beneath her, caught between ruin and something she could not yet name. And for the first time in days, perhaps years, she felt a thread of mercy pull her back from the edge. The first thing she felt was warmth. Not the bitter fire of the sun, but a softer heat, wrapped in quilts that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. Her eyes fluttered open to the ceiling above, wooden beams rough-hewn and darkened with age. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then the smells reached her. Stew, rich, heavy with meat and carrots. Bread, warm, crust crackling as it cooled. Her stomach twisted with a feral ache. She sat up slowly, the quilt falling from her shoulders. Beneath her palms, the mattress was soft, stuffed with feathers, so unlike the dirt and stone she had known. It frightened her, that softness. It felt like a trap, a kindness too sharp to touch without bleeding. The room was plain. A chair, a chest, a window that let in strips of gold morning light. Yet even in its simplicity she saw scars. A corner of wall marred by bullet holes. A shelf with photographs, their edges curling. In one frame, a woman's face, gentle and laughing, stared back in sepia. Next to it, half hidden in the drawer of a table, the edge of a bonnet lay folded like a memory no one wanted to wake. Her breath caught. This was not just a house. It was a place haunted. The door creaked. He entered without hurry, carrying a tray. His boots struck the floorboards with measured weight. He set the food down without looking at her, as though her eyes might burn him. "Eat," he said, voice low, final. Her hands shook as she reached for the bread. The crust snapped under her fingers, steam curling upward. She devoured it, piece after piece, stew spilling warm down her throat until she thought she might cry from the sheer pain of fullness. When the last spoon scraped the bowl, she dared a glance. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the floor. A scar dragged across his cheek, pale as bone against sunburned skin. He seemed carved from the same wood as the beams above him, solid, unmoving. Her voice cracked when it came. What do you want for this?" His eyes lifted then, sharp as steel. Silence filled the room, stretching tight as a noose. When he spoke, the words struck with the weight of iron. Work. Nothing else. She stared, uncomprehending. Shame flushed her cheeks. She had traded her body before, in darker places. She knew the cost of bread. She had expected the same here, but he turned from her, hands busying with nothing, as if her very question had dishonored him. "You'll cook," he continued. "Clean, help where you can. You pay with work, not flesh." Her lips parted, but no sound came. Confusion twisted with something she had not felt in years, something close to dignity. That night, silence filled the house. Floorboards groaned under his steps as he moved through the halls. Coyotes howled beyond the barn, their cries long and hollow, carried on the wind like a dirge. She lay awake beneath blankets that smelled of cedar, her body curled, waiting for a door to creak open, for hands rough with demand. But none came, only the faint crackle of the fire and the weight of her own disbelief. Days passed in this uneasy rhythm. He kept distance. She washed dishes, swept floors, gathered eggs with trembling hands. When her stitches tore at the hem of her dress, he left a small bundle of thread and cloth outside her door. No words. Only the gift. One evening, as the sun bled across the fields, he brought her a shirt torn at the sleeve. "Mend it," he said. His voice carried no softness but no cruelty either. Just command, plain as stone. She threaded the needle with shaking fingers. The fabric was coarse beneath her hands, worn thin at the elbows. When her knuckles brushed his arm, she felt the ridges of scars beneath the cloth. Old wounds carved deep, healed without tenderness. Her hand froze, breath caught in her throat. He did not flinch, did not move, but the air between them thickened like the moment before a storm. She lowered her eyes, finished the stitch, folded the shirt neatly, and placed it back in his calloused hands. Their fingers touched, only for a heartbeat, but it burned like fire. Nights grew longer, silence heavy. Yet in the silence, small kindnesses bloomed like wildflowers through stone. An extra blanket left by her door when frost crept in. A mug of coffee poured for her at dawn. Though he said nothing as she drank, she began to see it then. He did not see her as a bargain, a body for bread. He saw her as something else, something fragile, broken, but not worthless. And one night, as she lay awake listening to the coyotes and the wind, she felt a truth settle heavy in her chest. This man did not see a cheap trade. He saw a soul, bent but unbroken. The days turned slower on the ranch, stitched together by chores and silence. She rose before dawn, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, the sound of boots already on the porch. He worked the land with a kind of grim devotion, hands blackened by soil, face hidden under the brim of his hat. Yet she noticed the limp, subtle but there, the left leg dragging a fraction slower. his jaw tightening when he mounted a horse or bent to lift a bale. She noticed more than that. When church bells tolled faintly from the town on Sundays, his shoulders stiffened, his gaze fixed on the horizon as though seeing something far beyond the ringing. He carried ghosts. They clung to him like the dust that never left his boots. The townsfolk whispered it too. When she went in for flour, for salt, she heard their voices hushed but cutting. Cursed, that one. Lost his woman. Some say fever, others say... The words trailed, unfinished, like knives left in the air. She returned with her basket heavy and her chest hollow. Each time she passed the saloon, she felt the weight of eyes. Some looked at her with pity, others with contempt, but always with curiosity, as if she were trespassing in another woman's grave. One evening, as the sky bled crimson and shadows grew long, he sat by the fire, his face carved deep by flame and memory. She hesitated in the doorway, then stepped inside, her hands wringing the hem of her dress. The silence broke, not with her voice, but his. She was taken. The words fell heavy, a confession to the crackling wood. His eyes stayed fixed on the fire, not on her. His voice was low, steady, but brittle as dried bone. Raiders came. Tied me, beat me, made me watch. Her throat closed. He didn't need to say more. The image burned itself into her mind. A woman screaming, a man bound, helpless, rage boiling into silence. His scarred knuckles flexed against the arm of the chair, the firelight showing how deep the wounds went. Not just in flesh, but in soul. Buried her myself, he added, voice no louder than the wind outside. Since then, I've lived with cattle, not people. Easier to feed ghosts than faces. The flames cracked. She sat slowly on the chair across, her own body trembling. His pain had opened something inside her, a wound she had buried under dust and hunger. Her voice was a whisper, brittle as glass. My family, we were part of a wagon train, headed west. They came too, men with guns with fire in their eyes. Took everything. Left them in the dirt. She stopped, breath hitching. Her hands clutched the arms of the chair as though to keep from shaking apart. I ran, survived. Did what I had to. Gave what I had to, just to see another sunrise. Her body stiffened, coiled like a cornered animal. She had spoken too much, laid bare too many scars. Shame burned across her face. She waited for his judgment, his disgust, but he said nothing. His eyes, storm-dark, lifted from the fire and found hers. For a long moment, two broken histories hung between them, a wound mirrored in another. It was not love. Not yet. But it was recognition, the kind that needed no words, no touch. A spark of trust flickered in the ashes of two ruined lives. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the windows. Hooves echoed faintly from town, carrying voices too far to catch. But when the next morning came, word crept across the dirt streets like a plague. Strangers had ridden in. Hard-eyed men who asked too many questions, their faces shadowed under broad hats. On the wall of the general store, bounty posters curled in the heat, drawings of missing women, words offering silver for their return. She felt the blood drain from her face when she saw one flutter in the wind. Not her likeness, not yet, but close enough to tighten her chest with fear. The past, it seemed, was not done hunting. The first whispers came like snakes in tall grass, quiet, slithering, but sharp enough to draw blood. When she stepped into town with her basket, voices hushed, then rose again like buzzing flies. Women in bonnets turned their faces. Children giggled, their small fingers pointing. Men leaned against saloon posts, their mouths curling with cruelty. She's living out there now with him. Alone in that house, what you think she's paying with? God's house don't open to whores. The words clung to her like burrs. Each step down the wooden sidewalk felt heavier than the last. When she reached the store for flour, the shopkeeper barely looked her way. Coins clinked cold on the counter. His eyes slid past her as if she were a shadow, not a woman. Outside, laughter cut sharper than any blade. A boy, barely 10, shouted across the street, "Hey, mistress woman! How much you cost?" His friends shrieked with glee, scattering like sparrows when she dropped her basket. Her face burned. Shame crawled up her throat, strangling her. She wanted to vanish, to sink into the dirt itself. When she reached the ranch, she collapsed behind the barn, knees in the dust, the weight of it pressing her to the ground. That night, she nearly ran, bundled her few things, clutched her shawl against the wind, eyes fixed on the dark road out. But the coyote's howls stopped her, and something else, the sound of boots pacing slow inside the house. She stayed, trembling, torn between flight and despair. The next morning he went to town. She followed, head low, fear coiling in her chest like a snake ready to strike. The square was crowded, market day in full breath. Voices rose, laughter carried, but silence fell when he stepped into their midst. The rancher stood tall, shoulders squared, hat brim casting shadow over his scarred face. His eyes swept the crowd, unflinching. "She's my wife," 3 words. Heavy as thunder rolling across the plains, the silence that followed was thick, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels. Some faces dropped, shame biting their tongues. Others hardened, fury twisting their lips. A woman gasped. A man spat into the dust, but no one dared laugh. No one dared call her whore. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Her breath came short, sharp. She stared at him, stunned, her hands trembling against the fabric of her skirt. Wife. The word rang in her ears, foreign and dangerous, but shielding her like a cloak against the wind. When they returned, she followed him into the house, her pulse still hammering like war drums. The door shut behind them with a groan, and the silence between them burned hotter than the sun. She stood near the table, her body taut, eyes wide. At last her voice broke free. Why say that?" He turned. His face was unreadable, carved from stone. Yet his words cut through her, soft but sharp as a knife honed for years. "Because you deserve more than scraps." He stepped closer, slow, steady, his gaze never leaving hers. "You deserve a name," the words shattered her. Tears welled, hot and unstoppable, streaming down her cheeks before she could turn away. She pressed her hands to her face, choking on sobs she had buried for years. No man had ever spoken of her that way. Not as a bargain, not as flesh, not as survival, but as a woman worthy of honor. Through the blur of tears, she saw him place his hat on the table, his hands rough, scarred, yet steady. He did not touch her. He did not need to. His words alone had done what no embrace could. For the first time since she had stumbled half dead to his door, she felt something bloom inside her chest. Not hunger, not fear, but the faint, fragile echo of dignity returning. And though the town still buzzed with whispers, though shadows of doubt still lingered, that night she lay under his roof, not as a beggar, not as a ghost, but as a woman who finally carried a name, even if borrowed. Dawn came, soft, pale light spilling across the plains. For once the world felt still. She was at the well, rope in hand, the bucket rising heavy with water, when the sound of hooves cracked that fragile calm. At first, she thought it was neighbors, maybe passing riders. But as the figures drew near, shadows stretched long in the dust. 4 men, gaunt, hollow-eyed, their faces carved by hunger and hate. Their laughter came raw, jagged like rusted iron grinding. She knew them. Even before their boots hit the ground, her body stiffened, breath caught in her chest. Faces from nights she had buried, men who once took from her what they pleased when survival left her no shield. They had not forgotten. "Well, ain't this a surprise?" one drawled, yellow teeth flashing. "Thought we lost our favorite gal to the coyotes." Her knees threatened to buckle. The rancher stepped from the porch, shotgun in hand, jaw tight, eyes burning with a fury colder than winter steel. "She's not yours," he said. The words hung heavy. The drifters laughed, circling like wolves. "You think she's yours, old man?" "She was ours long before you." The rancher didn't flinch. Not anymore. The silence that followed snapped like a whip. Then chaos tore the morning apart. Gunfire erupted, savage, unrelenting. Horses screamed, rearing against the reins. Dust exploded from the ground as bullets tore through the yard. The sharp crack of the rifle echoed against the hills, mingling with the roar of pistols. She dove behind the trough, heart hammering, ears ringing. The stench of gunpowder thickened the air. She prayed for the earth to swallow her, for the sky to blot out the violence. But fate had other plans. A rough hand seized her from behind. She screamed as she was yanked from the shadows, dragged across the dirt. A knife pressed cold against her throat. sharp enough to draw a bead of blood. The drifter holding her snarled, eyes wild. "Drop it, rancher, or she dies here." Her vision blurred. Fear crawled icy down her spine. She felt the old helplessness creeping in, the cage of years past. But the rancher's gaze never wavered. His fury was a storm, silent and waiting for the strike. The man dragged her closer, blade biting into her skin. She cried out, voice raw, and then thunder. The rancher fired. The bullet struck true, snapping the drifter back, knife clattering into the dust as his body fell. She stumbled free, gasping, but another crack split the air, too late. The rancher staggered. Blood bloomed dark across his side, seeping through his shirt, spreading fast. His knees buckled, but he steadied himself, jaw clenched, firing again. Another drifter dropped. The last two turned tail, spurred their horses hard, vanishing in a cloud of dust that carried their curses away. Silence followed, heavy, crushing. She rushed to him, knees slamming into the dirt as he fell against the porch post. His breath came ragged, shallow. Blood pooled beneath him, hot and slick. Her hands shook as she pressed cloth to the wound, desperate to hold life in place. "Stay with me," she whispered, voice breaking. "Please, stay with me." His hand found hers, rough fingers curling weak but steady. His eyes, shadowed with pain, held hers with a weight that stilled the world. "I told you," he rasped, breath shuddering. "You're worth more." Tears streaked her cheeks. Falling into the dust, mixing with his blood, she pressed harder, praying the cloth would do what her heart begged, that it would keep him here. Breathing, fighting. The yard was quiet now, save for the groan of the wind carrying dust over the bodies sprawled in the dirt. The land smelled of gunpowder and iron. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was her sobs and the ragged pull of his breath. When the wind shifted, it carried the dead away in clouds of dust, their presence fading like ghosts dissolving into the plains. She looked at him then, truly looked, past the limp, past the scars, past the silence that had caged him all these years. He hadn't fought for land, nor pride, nor vengeance. He fought for her. And in the hollow quiet of that blood-soaked morning, her heart knew it. Time softened in the weeks that followed, though the land bore no mercy. Wounds healed slow on the body of a man who had carried too many already. He lay often in the great wooden bed, breath rough, sweat gathering at his brow, while she sat beside him, never far, never silent, though her words trembled when she read aloud from the Bible, or from a tattered book left behind by the wife who came before her. The house smelled different now. Stew simmered, bread baked, floors scrubbed clean of the dust that once ruled every corner. By the window she mended his shirts, fingers brushing seams torn by bullets and years of labor. At night she set a lamp low, sitting in the quiet while he slept, the coyotes' distant cries no longer filling her with dread. The scandal that once howled through town like a storm began to fade. Gossips tired of the tale. Men who had mocked now tipped their hats when she walked past. Women watched her with guarded eyes, but something in their stares had shifted, from scorn to something quieter, almost pity, perhaps even respect. The lie of wife spoken in the square had grown roots in the soil of rumor, until it seemed less a falsehood and more a fact no one dared to dispute. But inside the ranch house, no vows had been spoken. Only silence. Only the fragile bond of two souls mending side by side. One morning, as the frost still clung to the ground, he called her name. She found him standing by the porch rail, pale from healing, yet tall against the rising sun. He leaned heavier on his cane than before, but his eyes held a fire steady as any flame. "Walk with me," he said. They moved across the yard, past the corral where horses stamped their hooves in the chill. Toward the far side of the house they went, where skeletal timbers clawed toward the sky, a half-built frame long abandoned. Boards grayed with age, nails rusted, a dream once lost to storm and sorrow. He stopped before it, gaze fixed on the wood as though seeing through time itself. "This," he said quietly, "was meant to be a room for a child that never came. The storm tore it down, and I left it that way. Easier to let ruin stand than to build alone. Her breath caught. Wind rattled the beams, whispering through broken planks. With slow care, he reached to a tarp near the wall and pulled it back. Stacked beneath were fresh timbers, cut and shaped, waiting for hands to raise them. He had worked while she slept, while the days passed in care and silence. His labor had been hidden in shadows, nails driven through pain and grit. He turned to her, hands scarred, palms raw from the effort. From his pocket, he drew something small, silver dulled by time, yet catching the morning light like water flashing on stone. A simple band. No jewels, no polish, just the weight of a promise carried too long. His voice faltered when he spoke. I won't trade you for food. I won't let whispers name you less than you are. You gave me back breath I thought was gone. He paused, eyes steady, though his hand shook. I'll give you my name, the world stilled. The hawk circling high above, the horses shifting restless in the corral, the wind threading through the beams, everything quieted beneath those words. Her vision blurred with tears she had long forbidden herself. The ring was cool against her skin as he slipped it onto her trembling finger. A band not of barter, nor shame, nor desperation, but of legacy, of choice. For a moment she could not speak. Her throat closed, her heart pounded wild like war drums in the silence of dawn. She looked at him, this man scarred, broken, still bleeding from battles no one else could see, and found not pity, not fear, but a reflection of her own soul. Shattered, yes, but still alive. Yes, she whispered, though the word broke like glass. Yes. He exhaled, the sound rough but steady, and for the first time in years, something like peace touched the lines of his face. The day stretched on. He lifted the hammer with slow, deliberate strength, driving the first nail into new timber. The sound rang out sharp, echoing across the land, carrying farther than gunfire, farther than gossip. A sound of building, not breaking. She stood beside him, holding planks, steadying beams, her skirt brushed with sawdust, her hair caught in the wind. The smell of fresh wood filled the air, sharp and clean, as if the earth itself approved. By evening, the frame rose higher, stronger, each strike of the hammer laying claim not to ruin, but to rebirth. Not a guest's corner, not a hidden place of shame. A wife's room, a family's room. And when the sun sank low, setting fire to the horizon, the house no longer looked broken. It looked alive. Two souls once torn apart by hunger, grief, and violence now stood together, building not just walls, but a home from ruin.